I would like to just jump right in on the subject of passion. In the acknowledgments page of my book, Vital Signs, the last but not least entry there is an acknowledgement of my mother for being a consummate role model and living a passionate life, and for always giving me lots of material to write about. But there's a postscript to that acknowledgement that I'd like to share because it has everything to do with my personal interest in the subject of passion and what happens to passion in the course of our lives. And that is that in the last 15 or 20 years of my mother's life, starting roughly in her early 60s, her get up and go, got up and went, her spark, her mojo, vitality, life force. And I think it was a combination of a certain amount of neglect and a certain amount of the law of entropy. And what the law of entropy tells us is that systems have a tendency to lose energy over the course of time unless more energy is pumped into that system. So a hot cup of coffee is going to cool down unless you reheat it, right? Or a clock is going to wind down unless you rewind it, or oatmeal is going to congeal if you stop stirring it. As will marriages, I've discovered. That's another presentation though. But my mother just quit stirring the oatmeal. She just slowly opted out of active engagement in life, which is really what I think passion is ultimately about. And by the way, I'm referring to passion not just as in a passion, say a calling, but passion as a mindset, all right? Passion as a skill, as a stance that we either take or don't take toward our lives. And what crystallized this for me about my mother was really a singular conversation that she and I had a few years back. She had been at loose ends about how to spend her time since retiring from being a stockbroker almost 20 years prior. And one afternoon, very uncharacteristically, she asked me what I thought she should do with her time. So I made some suggestions. I said, well, what about taking some art classes? And she said, oh, I did that already. As if art, is something you do once and check off a list. I said, how about signing up for one of those music appreciation courses at the college that will take you on field trips to the symphony and the opera and whatnot, because she wasn't driving anymore. And she said, oh, that's for old people. So to that I said nothing, a better part of wisdom and survival. I said, what about a trip? I know you can't do the adventure travel anymore that you used to do, but how about a cruise up the Inside Passage or a barge trip in Provence or something? At least you'll get out of Dodge. And she just shrugged. I said, what about volunteering with SCORE? This is Service Corps of Retired Executives National Mentoring Program. I said, you have so much incredible experience that you could be passing along to the generations coming up through the ranks behind you. What about that? And she said, oh, please, volunteering? She said, that counts for absolutely nothing on a resume. And I said, Mother, you're 82 years old. Are you really still building your resume? I mean, not that you should ever give up the good fight, but seriously. And you know what? I think it was at that moment that I realized I had to give up my own good fight. This is the one where I continued, as really I had for 20 years at that point, to try to inspire her and encourage her and cajole her and nag her to take on some new challenges, to make some new friends, to get out of the house, uh, sort of shake the rat race out of her system and submit herself to some of the deeper and the higher callings that come in this later phase of life, just to come back to life, re-engage with the world, come back to life after what I perceived as the dual demotivators of retirement and a second divorce. Or as she put it at one point, no one to do it for anymore, which I think is a very revealing comment. No one to do it for. And maybe this is true for a lot of people, especially when they're working with retirement, for instance, that they discover that they have had sort of a radioactive core of depression inside of them. It was just being kind of held in check all those years by, if you will, the cooling towers of busy lives. And once those busy lives stop, or even just slow down, the depression comes to the fore. Maybe that's true, but my mother just simply lost the will to participate in life, to explore and create and contribute. And she just stopped investing herself in life, stopped investing in herself, which is kind of an ironic thing to say about a stockbroker, isn't it? But it turns out that you can't make somebody do that, no matter how much you love them and how much you care and how hard you try. You can't undo the spells that people put on themselves. Even if you're Mr. Callings, and your own mother's throwing your game all off, okay? But I wondered, and I wonder, how does this happen? How does it happen that people, especially people with a lot of life force, lose their interest in the game? How does passion turn into dispassion and boredom and resignation and just time being torn off the calendar unused? And of course, how do you stop the slide? And I know that it comes and goes. I mean, I know this is just a function of passion itself. It comes and goes. There's really no such thing as a life of passion anymore. I think that there's a perpetual motion object. It's got its seasons and it comes and goes. I also know that really life is perfectly capable of knocking the stuffing out of people. Even very strong people, with all of its demands and its disappointments. And I know there's been a lot of those in the last year and a half or so for people. Its routines, its responsibilities, its, how many of you have ever seen the movie Dead Poets Society? Okay, it's a popular movie. A lot of people have seen it. You probably recognize this remark. I heard somebody say this once. She said, I have a Carpe Diem mug. Okay, a Carpe Diem mug. She said, truthfully, at 6 a.m., the words do not make me want to seize the day. They make me want to slap a dead poet. I understand. And I know that there's also a clue in there when my mother said there's no one to do it for anymore. Because that speaks to what psychologists refer to as primary and secondary motivation. Okay, primary motivation is you're doing something because you love it, whatever it is, whether it's a creative or relational or spiritual, you're doing it because you love it, because it speaks to you deeply, it has a sense of meaning and purpose for you. Secondary motivation is doing it for a payoff, doing anything for a payoff. Money, influence, sex, power, whatever. And really, I think there's a pretty simple test. to determine which one of those two is in the driver's seat. And that is that when and if the payoffs dry up, do you still do the work? Are your passions still intact? Is your faith still intact? Right? I also know that the clinging to security and comfort, a lot of which has been yanked out from under people in the last year or so, right? But the clinging to those things is not just a personal challenge. It's multi-generational, it's historical, and it's collective. I mean, we live in a culture that really likes its status quos, its its securities of one kind or another, its safety nets, gates and guardrails. We love all that. But I think the truth is that we don't just crave safety and security. We don't just crave those things. We also crave their opposite, which is novelty and discovery and passion and discovery, an adrenaline rush from time to time. For some people, a locker at the bus station. We actually, many of us like life to be a little bit unpredictable and full of surprises, new discoveries, and we like to feel alive. I think simply we like to feel alive. Joseph Campbell said, everybody thinks meaning is the most important thing to achieve. Meaningful life, meaningful work, meaningful relationships. He said he thought what was more important to people was aliveness, the experience of what he called the rapture of being alive. And I think we also know intuitively that being alive without feeling alive is kind of like eating food with no taste to it, right? And so there's this wonderful book I recommend, a beautiful book called Art and Fear. And it's really more than just about art. It's kind of the art of living, Art and Fear. And there's a quote in there where the authors of the book say, your life mirrors what you put into it and what you withhold from it. When you hold back, it holds back. When you hesitate, it stands there staring at you with its hands in its pockets. But when you commit, it comes on like blazes. Helps to have a fire extinguisher in the room for this sort of event. But my point is, it's tragically easy to lose touch with our passion, with our energy, and our enthusiasm. Beautiful word. Entheos means the God within. Okay? By following your deepest enthusiasms, therefore, you are literally, by definition, following God, honoring God. But it's easy to lose touch with that, and to say nothing of our direction in life and our purpose. To lose a sense of wonder or wildness or adventure and novelty and discovery and self-expression. It's very easy to have them, let them kind of slide into disuse or get kind of siphoned from you by just all the downward pulling forces that are really kind of part of just living on Mulberry Street life, day to day, stress, anxiety, fear, boredom, to say nothing of things like, a Great Recession or a Code Orange world or a plague, easy to, it's understandable that people would feel like hunkering down, okay? Battening the hatches, all right? Been a lot of that, even in my life this past year or so. In fact, it strikes me sometimes that life itself is so full of deterrence to passion and enthusiasm and authenticity and aliveness, that what we sort of casually refer to as normal behavior is really a state of arrested development. We just don't notice it until we do notice it. I used to live in Asheville, North Carolina. I lived around the corner from a beautiful old Victorian graveyard. And one day I was wandering around and I saw a gravestone for a W.C. Stradley, and his epitaph said, He lived a spotless life, a triumphant death. So what do you make of that? Spotless life, a triumphant death. I thought I would much rather have it the other way around. A triumphant life, a spotless death. I mean, that works for me. I just think that a spotless life just doesn't strike me as something to aspire to. I mean, I think if you don't leave this life with a few, good grass stains on your pants and some great stories to tell about your encounters with the seven deadlies, you've missed the boat, if not the point, which is not to rise above it all, not to wear your Sunday best all week. Although I understand that during the pandemic and the Zoom era now, your Sunday best probably just includes whatever you're wearing from the waist up. From the waist down, it's like shorts and pajama bottoms and sweatpants and whatnot. But nonetheless, I think the point is to sink your teeth into it. Sink your teeth into it. Just let it drip down your chin. I've got a friend who has a poster on the wall in her kitchen. Shows a picture of a woman down on her hands and he's scrubbing out a bathtub. And a caption that says, "A clean house is the sign of a wasted life." And I just find that very amusing, and in which case I should be doing great. But here's 5 things briefly that I would love to share with you what I've learned about passion and its role in sort of human affairs, whether they're mortal affairs or spiritual affairs. 1, passion, it can be cultivated. Passion can be cultivated. It can be turned on as well as off. In other words, this is not one from the either you've got it or you don't department, in my opinion. And I think that the cultivation of passion happens best at the level of the moment and the decision, the spontaneous action, the gesture, rather than, the 5-year plan or the extreme makeover or something. I'm sitting around with some friends one evening, a couple of years back, sitting around with some friends. One of them at one point says, "You know what the problem is? We're not outrageous enough." And I said, "So Richard, what would you do if you were going to be more outrageous?" And he thought about it for a moment, and then he reached his hand up and he swept it through his hair, changing it from middle parted and slicked back to side parted with cowlick dangling over his forehead. I mean, just like instantly transforming him from Richard to Ricardo, PhD to matinee idol. And he said, "I would come into work like this." And I found that fascinating because it strikes me that it's about starting with the subtlest impulses to express yourself, to act on your passions. So what you're, and to build from there. So what you're doing is you're really looking for little switches, in the course of a day, little moments of choice that will take you either toward or away from really your sense of aliveness. All right. Number 2, I think it's important to identify where you lose passion in your daily affairs, where you lose it. What elements in your work or your home life, your social life, your creative life, for that matter, your spiritual life, that drain energy out of you rather than replenishing it. Okay. I sat down years ago and I made a list. This is during my employment years rather than self-employment. And I made a list of activities that I was engaged in that were draining energy from me rather than giving it to me. And they included work and non-work involvement, such as letting my editors at the newspaper assign me stories instead of coming up with my own ideas. which they encouraged me to do, not clearly defining what success meant to me. So scattering my energies a lot. And then things like socializing out of guilt. Okay, I suspect that probably rings a bell for some of us. Driving in rush hour traffic when I didn't need to be, doing my own taxes rather than farming it out. As a rule for me, television, or allowing myself to get trapped into conversations with talkaholics. By the way, there's a 12-step group I've heard for talkaholics. It's called On and On Anonymous. Anyway, this is where Newton's third law of motion would come in really handy. Okay, you know, equal and opposite reactions. So it's important to not just identify where passion and vitality drain out of us, but what tactics, what environments, what mindsets, what relationships replenish the energy in your life. I think it's important to really identify those things because if you want to live, with passion, I think you have to identify whatever blocks its expression. I think that is part of it. And frankly, from what I understand, it's pretty much a threefold process. And that is identify pain, okay? Obstacles, suffering, identify those things, process it, meaning think it through, feel it through, and reclaim your vitality, okay? And all of that is easier said than done, okay? I really offer a gracious bow to how challenging that can actually be. But you know, I know people who wrestle alligators for a living, literally. I know people who chase after tornadoes for a living. I know people who motorcycle jump over rows of school buses, okay, who wouldn't be caught dead in a therapist's office, or a 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat, or doing inner work, which they call, as my father used to, navel gazing, and I call mental health, all right? 3, passion, I believe, is in the risk. Passion is in the risk, okay? Meaning that it's the willingness to step from the sidelines onto the playing field, so that the act of courage itself, even one bold step beyond the comfort zone, will kickstart that, okay? Many of you may have seen a movie called We Bought a Zoo, all right? We Bought a Zoo. And there's a scene in it where the protagonist, who's played by Matt Damon, says to another one of the characters, all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, and I promise you something great will come of it. 20 seconds of insane courage. And I just love that. So the horse and cart equation is not necessarily that you identify your passions in life and then begin taking steps on their behalf, taking action, but sometimes it is only by taking action that you begin to clarify for that what your passions are and what your sense of purpose is, what really matters to you. I did a consultation years ago with a guy who said to me that he's waiting for absolute clarity before he would act on some passion he had apparently identified. Absolute clarity? I mean, how does that strike you? So here's a guy who's, you know, waiting for his proverbial ducks to all get lined up before he would act. And that happens, I think, roughly around the same time the cows come home. Okay, waiting for absolute clarity. I said to him that I thought that the clarity he seemed intent on finding and waiting for, he might only find by taking action. That's my sense. It's also been my sense in my own life of how that works. You might be familiar with the name Abraham Maslow, okay? He's the psychologist who gave us the hierarchy of needs pyramid. All right. At the bottom, food, clothing, and shelter. Above that, belonging to a tribe, etc. At the top, self-actualization. He's the guy who coined that term, self-actualization, referring to people who tend to fulfill their potential. He said self-actualizing types are the people who make the growth choice over the fear choice routinely. The growth choice over the fear choice routinely, which experience tells me is a bar set pretty high. It reminds me actually of a conversation I had with a mentor of mine years ago when I was thinking of planning on quitting employment for self-employment as a writer. And I had lunch with him. I said, I'm frankly terrified of failing at this venture and then finding my bank account shot and my journalism career behind me. I'm just afraid I'm going to fail at the thing. And he said, Greg, I have news for you. If you're not failing regularly, you're living so far below your potential that you're failing anyway. Wow. This explains why I had lunch with him maybe once a year. Because there's mentors and there's tour mentors, which, I actually mean to make light of, because that's actually a good thing, to cultivate relationships in your life with people who, in a sense, aren't afraid to make fun of the king or the queen. They're perfectly happy to kind of run tire tracks right across your nice, neat suburban lawn. And these are actually really useful relationships to cultivate. Number 4, passion is not, in my opinion, just about exuberance. It's about endurance. It's, sometimes shoulder to the wheel stamina and patience on the order of years. Okay. My point being that, if your, let's say, creative inspirations or even your infatuations are not balanced by good long hours at the workbench, as it were, they often won't simply come to fruition. It reminds me of this famous thing that Malcolm Gladwell, the author Malcolm Gladwell, once said. He said, mastery in any field of endeavor requires a minimum of 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. So here's the math on that. That means 90 minutes a day for 20 years, or some variation thereof, right? 90 minutes a day. Most of us would rather just skip ahead to the part where we're awesome, okay? But this is how it works. Any of you who have ever performed in a play, okay, or a band, you probably know this, that out of 100%, the percentage of time you spent rehearsing compared to performing, probably what, 80-20, 90-10? Does that sound about right? Rehearsing compared to performing. And I think it's largely passion that explains people's willingness to put up with that equation, practice the same lines, the same lyrics, the same chords for thousands of hours for the chance to go public with it a tenth of the time. I think it's passion that explains that. And unfortunately, I think we tend to think of passion as an inherently unstable element, prone to degrading quickly when exposed to commitment or familiarity. We think of it, I think, like a booster rocket in the space program, launches you to outer space, but once it reaches orbit, it falls away. But my actual boots on the ground experience of passion in my own life is not really that. It's got tremendous staying power when you're really embedded in something you are passionate, or someone you are passionate about. There's often tremendous staying power. I think of one of my heroes, who's actually a heroine. and that's Scheherazade. Okay, remember Scheherazade? She's the queen whose stories make up all the Arabian Nights, all right? It took her 1,001 nights to turn the Sultan around. You may remember this. He had these egregious and homicidal laws. Took her 1,001 nights, 3 years to turn that around. So it's got staying power. And I remember an acquaintance of mine told me that he was once arrested at an anti-war sit-in, given a suspended sentence with 15 hours of community service. And he told me that the judge told him, you can do any kind of service you like. When they let him out, he said he went right back to the sit-in. And his explanation was, I was doing community service when they arrested me. And I love that story of sticking power. I just love that. That to me speaks volumes about passion, not just being flash in the pan. Okay. Finally, 5, if we lack passion in our own lives, for our own lives, I think our other relationships are going to be denied that energy. Our friendships, our colleagues and coworkers and children and congregants and students, corporations, communities, they're all going to be denied that energy because I think the equation is probably pretty straightforward. Passion leads to passion, and disinterest leads to disinterest, right? And that starts with the one-on-one. One person following their deepest sense of passion and enthusiasm, again, in the deepest sense of that word, can have a profound effect on the unfolding of those qualities in other people, and sometimes without you even knowing about it. Especially if you're in any position of leadership or stewardship, okay? Meaning that whether you're a parent or a teacher or a mentor or a minister, manager, coach, counselor, CEO, politician, I think this much is probably clear, at least it is to me. Your passion is critical to their engagement. Now, I know that is why my father, when I headed off to college, said to me, don't take courses, take professors. I'm pretty sure that's what he was after. All right. So let me wind up with this very brief story that I love and that really speaks to the heart of this idea about passion. And this comes from the Colombian novelist Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who some of you may remember from Love in the Time of Cholera, which got a boost in readership over the pandemic, I gather, and 100 Years of Solitude. So he tells the story of a man who's trying to change the world. And his little boy comes running into the studio and asks if he can help. And the man is touched by the boy's concern, but he's impatient to get on with it. So he takes a map of the world and he rips it into little tiny pieces and hands it to the boy and says, here, you can help by piecing the world back together. And, the boy doesn't have any conception of what the world looks like, but he takes the pile of scraps back to his room. And 2 days later, he comes running back into his father's studio and says, Father, I've put the world back together. And all of the little pieces of paper have been meticulously taped back together. And the father's stunned. And he says, how did you do that? And the boy turns the paper over and he says, well, on the back was a picture of a person. I put the person back together and then I turned it over and the world was back together. And I just find that ravishing. Isn't that ravishing? So in the spirit of helping to piece the world back together, if not our own individual lives, I just want to say, and also staking a claim for your own vitality, I want to say that the webinar on Wednesday evening is a very hands-on opportunity, not lecture format, hands-on participatory opportunity to clarify the state of your own vitality at this juncture in your life. All right, where your passions are showing up, where they're disappearing, what wants to emerge at this juncture, what wants to emerge. So I very much hope you'll join us, and a community, of course, of fellow seekers. And finally, I just want to say thank you, and thank you, David, for inviting me back. And I wish us all great good luck in whatever unfolds next. Thank you.
Let there be peace in my mind, peace in the earth. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Shanti Om. 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 Oh, Shanti Om. Peace inside my mind, God and only God is moving me. Peace inside my mind, God and only God I live to see. Peace inside my mind, God and only God is moving me. Peace inside my mind, God and only God I live to see. Oh, Shanti Om. Peace inside my heart, God and only God is moving me. Peace inside my heart, God and only God I live to see. Peace inside my heart, God and only God is moving me. Peace inside my heart, God and only God I live to see. Oh, Shanti Om. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, 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 Shanti Om.